G'day chaps, tis I, Clampuncher139. Well, it only took 4 years, but I finally caved in and bought a PlayStation, rather than an Xbox Series X. So all you telling me to play Spider-Man can shut up now, because I've finally done it. I can finally say that I have played Insomniacs Spider-Man. And yeah, I won't even try to BS you or waste any time building it up. This game is freaking amazing in literally every aspect. This is the Spider-Man game everyone has been waiting years for, and I couldn't be happier that I finally played it. Honestly, it's no surprise this game is so fantastic because of the studio behind it. Insomniac is one of the few publishers you can pretty much always trust to put out an amazing title, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park once again with Spider-Man. So, without any further delay, let's get into a 4-year late review of Marvel's Spider-Man. This is your full game spoiler warning, by the way. Go away now if you want to play the game for yourself, because I'm literally going to go over the entire plot. Then again, it's been out for 4 years, and if you're watching this video, you've probably already played it, so whatever. To the review! This game is nearly perfect in just about every regard. It looks, sounds, and plays phenomenally, the story is super compelling, and to pull a page from every reviewer in 2009, it really makes you feel like Spider-Man. Swinging through the streets of New York, stopping crimes with various web-based gadgets, and literally defying the laws of physics to beat up criminals are some of the best feelings I've had playing a modern game. The story is engaging from start to finish, as the city slowly becomes more and more corrupted by crime until it's a literal war zone you have to try and resolve by yourself. Meanwhile, Peter, in true Spider-Man fashion, is dealing with his own problems behind the scenes, including but not limited to a strained relationship with his ex, getting evicted from his apartment, and trying to balance his work life with Dr. Octavius and his homish life with May while being Spider-Man. It's all brought together into a beautiful package that's incredibly engaging on both the story and gameplay front from start to finish. So, let's break down everything I praised one at a time. Everything about this game looks and sounds phenomenal. Even though I was playing the PS4 version, the graphics were absolutely gorgeous. Spider-Man's animations are so fluid in literally everything he does, be it kicking thugs in the face, parkouring over cars and desks, or flipping around as he launches off a web swing. It's all absolutely beautiful. The character design for every single model in this game is excellent. Spider-Man himself has such a unique design in this game, the classic red and blue we all love, but trading out the black webbing for a large white spider across his chest is so cool. And basically everyone else is just as impressive. They took basically all the classic characters we all love and put their own unique spin on it. I will admit I was a little put off by Peter's design at first, but I quickly got used to it. But everyone else just fit perfectly right from the start. Otto, Aunt May, Electro, MJ, Rhino, Osborn, and everyone in between are all perfect. From the moment you boot up the game and hear the absolutely incredible title theme, you know you're in for an epic experience. All the music is absolutely incredible in this game, though isn't necessarily as memorable as other video game music. Hearing the score swell as you start swinging through the city is great, but even with how much time you spend swinging in the game, the themes never really got caught in my ears. They're all good, great even, and perfectly set the tone for the game, but none are particularly memorable unless they contain Spider-Man's leitmotif. It could be that I just wasn't paying enough attention to the background tunes, or that I haven't spent enough time with the game for it to even stick with me. I don't know. But aside from the large moments with that aforementioned leitmotif, nothing really stood out. But man, is that theme incredible. I've only played this game twice, and it's already standing out as one of the all-time greats when it comes to superhero themes. Right up there with the MCU Avengers theme and Arkham's Batman theme. It is that good. The voice cast as a whole is phenomenal. Everyone really pulls their weight giving solid takes on their characters. I was really surprised to hear Yuri Lowenthal as Spider-Man, because I will always know him as the male player from Sunset Overdrive.
We do, Norman, but it doesn't tell us enough. Which is why I'm doing some slightly illegal but morally acceptable B&E right now.
I guess Insomniac really didn't want to see him go, so brought him back for Peter, and I think they made a really solid choice. His voice in tandem with Spidey's quips fit perfectly.
You know, people don't use banks anymore. You're lucky you found actual cash.
I knew I recognized Octavius from somewhere, but I just couldn't put my foot on it until I looked at the IMDb and learned he was played by William Salyers, who plays my main man Rigby from Regular Show.
From a certain viewpoint, that's a very positive development. Stop talking!
And if you know anything about me, you know I adore Regular Show, so hearing his voice was an incredible treat.
The worst part is, it only affects the muscles. The mind continues to work, but it can no longer do.
He gives a really solid Doc Ock, perfectly blurring the line between calm and collected and absolute insanity.
We've got enough! For the first time in my life, I don't feel like a failure. I feel like me.
It's hard to suppress the legendary Alfred Molina as Octopus, but I honestly think Salyers did it.
Everything you have is built on lies! Lies!
Laura freaking Bailey, who is just like everywhere, just look at her IMDb and you'll probably find something you know, plays MJ, which was yet another delight to see.
Did you just leave your clothes on the kitchen floor?
She perfectly portrays Spider-Man's ex trying to separate herself from his life and become her own person, and pulls off the very rare feat of being an actually strong female character who pulls just as much weight as Peter in taking down the bad guys throughout the game without any powers to her name.
No, we're partners, remember?
Can we argue later?
If we don't help those people, they could die.
So could you. I can't let that happen.
No, I got myself into this. I'm getting myself out.
What do you mean you got yourself into this?
Stephen O. Young is getting praised for the second time in a row on this channel as he gives a great performance as Martin Lee / Mr. Negative.
I must be honest, I was hoping to bring you here. My abilities lend me a certain persuasiveness.
And if you remember my Gotham Knights review, you know he was pretty much the best actor in that game as he played Jason. I'm really interested to see what else he does in the future because he's got a good thing going right now.
Mr. Lee.
This will be easier for everyone if you remain calm and do as I say.
All the other characters have great voices that perfectly fit their characters, as do the rest of the thugs, pedestrians, and minor characters I didn't mention. Everyone is really pulling their weight in this game. There's not a single dud among them. All the care that went into the aesthetics of this game was phenomenal. There's basically nothing I can complain about or even bring up as a slight criticism. It's all so perfect, so let's just move on to the story. The story has a lot to unpack. Once again, there will be full game spoilers, so go away if you don't want to know the entire plot of this game. The prologue is absolutely fantastic and perfectly sets the tone of the game going forward. You're thrown right into a police chase through Times Square as Spidey and the police are finally going to take down the notorious Kingpin. Spider-Man makes a long climb up a collapsing skyscraper, taking down Fisk's men and helping the cops along the way. It's incredibly epic. Peter eventually confronts Fisk himself in an awesome fight and is able to come out on top. And just like that, we've taken down one of Spider-Man's most dangerous foes in the prologue of the game, and get an interesting line from Fisk as he's taken away.
1 month! In 1 month you'll wish you had me back!
With that out of the way, and this little tablet showing us that basically all the dangerous villains are locked up, what's left for the story? Well, the first half of Act 1 mostly plays out as a day in the life of Spider-Man. We get to see his other job, how he balances that with being a superhero, and his relationship with May over at the Feast Center, and just generally get to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man for a while. It's a nice change of pace going from the incredibly energetic opening where you're fighting an onslaught of armed goons to just jumping into back alleys to stop a mugging and help people. It unlocks a good majority of side missions and is generally used to lower the player's guard for the events soon to follow. Because halfway through you get the big turning point of the act, Don't Touch the Art, which introduces the new faction you'll be fighting for a majority of the game, the Demons. They've invaded Fisk's estate sale and are holding the staff hostage, along with a certain someone Peter knows very well.
Hey, Pete.
Because it's also our introduction to the one and only Mary Jane, who gets a nice little introductory detective section where we start to learn about this new faction. It seemingly doesn't lead to much right now because we just take them down and get a mask to show for our efforts, but trust me, you have not seen the last of these guys. We get a couple more missions where we start to see more of what the demons are capable of. Apparently, even Mr. Lee is scared of them because of what their masks represent, being a scary story his parents used to tell him growing up. Wonder if that'll come back later. We correctly guessed that they also break Shocker out of prison and use him as a pawn for a bit, and he's apparently so scared to tell Spider-Man anything despite generally being portrayed as an idiot. If an idiot is scared, you know you should probably be scared too. They break into a warehouse on the docks to steal weapons from Fisk and even invade one of his construction site bases to kill his men. Few people can take on the Kingpin head on and live, even while he's behind bars, so these demons must be a real big threat. Right? You don't know the half of it. After all this build-up, we finally get a sense of their big plan when we get to the finale of Act 1. It starts with an awards ceremony for Jefferson Davis, a cop who recently helped us take down a bunch of demons and even save Spider-Man's life, who also happens to be the father of a certain someone Spider fans really love right now. Everything starts to go awry, however, when Mayor Osborn gets a call from a familiar voice.
Over the coming days, your company, your city, and everything you care about will be destroyed.
Tension rises as we see Peter's spider sense beginning to tingle, and we slowly see just what we're in for. Act 1 ends with a suicide bombing. I was legitimately in shock the first time I witnessed this scene. Superhero games have heinous acts committed throughout, no doubt about it, but this is something I'd expect to see standing next to Captain Price, not the freaking webhead. We literally walked through their destruction as a defenseless kid, watching them gun down civilians in cold blood in hopes of finding our father who was right in the center of the blast. It's an incredibly dark scene that I'm honestly surprised made it into the game. Again, death in a superhero game is nothing new, but death this graphic and realistic certainly is. It's genuinely disturbing, and trust me when I say that I mean that in the best possible way. It perfectly sets the tone for the demons going forward. They are not your basic run-of-the-mill thugs who just mug people in a back alley for a few bucks. They are terrorists who will go out of their way to kill people. They do not care how much blood is spilled. They have a goal, and they are going to accomplish it. And leading them is none other than Martin Lee. Again, I was genuinely shocked when I saw this reveal. I'm not very big on Spider-Man lore, so I had no idea who Mr. Negative was. And seeing a character who seemed like one of the most pure souls imaginable turn into this was something else. And let's not forget that this mission also introduces us to everyone's new favorite Spider-Man since Spider-Verse existed, Miles Morales. It's a great mission that perfectly shifts the tone from relatively silly game where Spider-Man is being his usual witty self to genuine threat we need to solve and just happen to be using a superhero who defies all laws of physics to solve it. And the game doesn't just go back to sunshine and rainbows after that intense system shock. It knows the tone it set with that mission and is going to stick to it for basically the rest of the act. Sure, there's a few moments of brevity where we get to see other characters like MJ and Miles, but as a whole, it keeps that darker tone. It understands the seriousness the demons need to be treated with, so all the missions are generally pretty serious. Sure, you go to a Halloween party and get harassed by a wannabe rhino 1 minute, but in that same mission, you're trying to save a doctor's life and end up watching him succumb to Lee's bidding and kill himself right in front of your eyes. The game gets really dark when it wants to in between all of Spidey's quips. There's a long line of missions that don't really matter to the overall story and are kinda just there to further emphasize the demons and show the grand scale of their plan. Basically, they're trying to get a secret serum Oscorp is developing called Devil's Breath. It's intended to be a medicine that targets the virus directly, but is currently the equivalent of a bioweapon, so it's under extremely tight lock and key. Well, they get their hands on it, and that eventually leads to what you'd think would be the endgame, with a climactic battle in Grand Central Station. Mary Jane has to defuse a bomb, Peter has to take on a massive horde of demons without being seen, and eventually chases Lee into the subways for a big, seemingly final battle. It seems to wrap everything up in a nice little bow, but we're merely approaching the finale of Act 2. The finale of Act 2, or start of Act 3, whichever way you want to slice it, is a prison riot. After locking up Fisk and Lee, we see this little tablet that shows all the villains we've locked up in the raft, among them being Rhino, Vulture, Electro, and Scorpion. I mean, why would they show all these villains existing if they're already locked up? Because now they're all breaking out. The riot itself is amazing, and it's pretty much the stuff we didn't see during the Blackgate riots in Arkham Origins. We've got explosions going off every other second, inmates with rifles and RPGs, helicopters crashing, police being overrun, and Spider-Man being the only one who can get around the area quickly enough to take them all down. But as if this basic riot wasn't enough, the maximum security wing goes down as well. So now, all of the villains Spider-Man previously locked up are about to be on the loose unless he can take them down quickly. He swings through the destroyed prison as fast as he can, stopping at some escapees along the way until he finds Electro. He chases him through and along the exterior of the prison as Yuri starts telling him that the other villains are being released as well. And eventually, Spidey is led to the roof. He's confronted on all sides by his most dangerous villains. Electro, Rhino, Scorpion, and Vulture are joined by Lee. They beat him down relentlessly until he's literally crawling away on his last string of energy. 5 enemies against 1. What hope does Peter have? Well, after a surprise visitor, not very much.
First and final warning. Stay out of our way.
Enter Otto Octavius, the one and only Dr. Octopus. We've seen his descent into madness over the course of the game, and it all culminates here with the introduction of the Sinister Six. They're going after Osborn, and nothing is going to stand in their way. He gives Spider-Man a warning to stay away, then throws him off the building into the sea, where he barely hangs on to life and is rescued by the police. Otto's shift into Doc Ock isn't exactly surprising. I mean, he's basically the most famous Spider-Man villain of all time aside from maybe Green Goblin, but it's still handled excellently. We see him at the start of the game as a good-natured scientist just trying to make the world a better place, but everything is slowly taken away from him. First, his grant money is taken, so he has to rely on favors and his own out-of-pocket expenses to fund his research, and he can't even pay Peter anymore. His inventions keep failing, and he has to rely on Peter to clean them up or otherwise make them more practical. And his body is slowly failing, leaving only his mind intact. It won't be long before he can't even walk, let alone build life-altering inventions to help people. And it all ties back to Osborn. He ruined so many lives at Oscorp that the world never saw and still got all the praise, while Otto was just trying to help people and never got anything. He grew envious and made it his mission to get revenge on Norman. And with these new arms and allies, there's no reason he shouldn't be able to. He releases Devil's Breath on the city, plunging it into a terrible pandemic where people are collapsing left and right, and he begins targeting Oscorp facilities in an attempt to completely destroy Norman's company. Now the whole city is a war zone. everyone is against Spider-Man, and it's up to him to take down all these villains and keep Osborn alive. I absolutely adore this final act, because, like I said, everyone is against Spider-Man, and he's just doing his best to resolve a literal war zone across Manhattan. There is not a single friendly face in New York anymore. Merely swinging through the city has been turned into a Disney night show aimed right at you. Enemies are literally everywhere, and it creates a great sense of danger throughout the final act. And most of it is just taking down supervillains and trying to find a cure for Devil's Breath. It's much shorter than the other two acts, but more than makes up for it with mission content. You go on really long missions to take down the villains, though I will admit deal with them pretty quickly overall. You don't get to spend as much time with them as I would have liked. You get the most time with Electro since you chase him at the prison riot, as well as get a quick mission saving the police at the beginning of the act. And of course his inevitable boss fight. But he's probably the one you see the most out of the 4 new members. Scorpion gets a decently long level where you go on a drug trip and his inevitable boss fight down the line, but it's still not much screen time. Rhino gets a great level where you play as Miles as well as his boss fight, but that's it. And then Vulture only appears for a boss fight. He doesn't even get a dedicated level. All these guys, especially Vulture, were kinda shafted in this final act. They kinda just show up, get a quick level in a boss fight, and they're gone. Which is really a shame when they're all such fun characters. I feel like giving them at least one more level each would have done wonders to making their appearances more impactful, even though they definitely made a good impression in that limited screen time. I will admit though, it might hurt the pacing a little to add these in, because the current pacing of the game is really solid, and adding in 3 or 4 additional levels just to show the villains doing something might feel like unnecessary bloating. Especially since, again, the fights with them are really good. We'll get to them later. Either way you slice it, this final act is pretty much cleanup. Spider-Man goes around defeating all the villains before they can really wreck the city, and eventually locks them all back up except for Lee and Otto. He learns the truth behind Lee's condition and why he and Otto hate Osborn so much. It's yet another case of sympathetic villains we all know and love, and Peter's fights with them are really impactful because of this. We know both of these men are good people deep down, but they've fallen too far from grace to redeem themselves. He wants to help them, but neither accept. I'll get into the fights themselves in a later section, but for now let's just talk about their outcomes. Defeating Mr. Negative has Octavius come in and kidnap Osborn, steal the Devil's Breath antidote, and leave Spider-Man hanging on by a thread once again. He's going to expose Norman for what he is in front of the whole city and never release the antidote, seeing as the 5 he broke out of prison are literally useless to him now. Peter just barely survives the encounter and essentially needs surgery at the Feast Center just to live. He struggles to even stand, but knows he has to get up and fight Otto because Aunt May is on her last legs too. She could go at any moment, so Peter risks what little life he has left to help her and the rest of the city. He heads back to the lab to make an awesome new suit to be able to stand up to Otto with, and goes after him for the finale. He fights Otto with all his resolve, holding absolutely nothing back. Peter keeps trying to appeal to Otto's last shred of humanity, but it isn't there. He's essentially talking to dead air, so instead just keeps fighting. After a brutal beatdown, Otto is finally able to start fighting back. He breaks Peter's mask and reveals that he knew Peter was Spider-Man the whole time, leading to an incredibly emotional scene where Peter just wails on Otto on the side of a building. They're both incredibly tired and weak at this point, but Peter just keeps on attacking, shouting at Otto about how disappointed he is. It's a fantastic finale to the game that is both epic and emotional. In the first draft of the script, I didn't give nearly enough credit to Yuri Lowenthal's performance because I had honestly forgotten all the emotional beats he's put through towards the end. But upon replaying to gather footage, just wow. Voice acting is hard enough, but voice acting the emotional moments Peter goes through in the endgame was an immense call to action. But damn it if Yuri doesn't pull through and absolutely nail them. You can hear the disbelief and anger in his voice when he finds out Otto knew.
You knew? I tried to warn you, Peter, but you didn't listen.
You
knew.
And you can just feel the tears running down his face when he's leaving Otto behind.
No, you're wrong! You are everything I wanted to be! You just threw it away!
He may honestly be typecasted as the funny man, because let's face it, his voice alone is pretty funny. But holy crap does his emotion shine through in this game. Give this man more roles, for the love of God. And that's not to say William Salyers isn't giving it his all as Otto in this scene too.
I won't let you win. This means too much to me. Not more than it means to me!
You can just hear how crazy he is in this fight, how far he's fallen from grace, and how desperate he is to appeal to Peter after the fight.
Otto! If you want to change the world, you have to be the kind of man who can make the hardest decisions.
Him begging Peter to help him avoid prison is really emotional, and you can perfectly understand Peter crying as he walks away, because he knows he just failed and had abandoned his friend.
You do what you think is best, Doc. It's all any of us can. Peter? Even when it hurts like hell. Peter, where are you going? Peter? Peter!
Both of these actors are absolutely giving it their all in this scene, and it's just spectacular. Peter does win this fight, but it sadly wasn't enough. The antidote needs hours or even days to be recreated so they can distribute it to the city. Aunt May doesn't have that time though. Peter considers giving her the only vial they have to save the one person he truly cares about, but makes the ultimate decision to let her go.
Take off your mask. I want to see my nephew.
May, just like Otto, knew Peter was Spider-Man, and says how proud she was of him, how proud Ben would have been.
And I am so proud of you. And Ben would be too.
And then, the game actually does it. This game had the balls to kill off Aunt May. Again, Lowenthal is absolutely killing this moment in every way.
You're gonna be okay, ma'am. I've got the cure right here.
You can hear the shaking in his voice as he tries to muster up the words but just can't say them. You can tell he's really crying behind that camera and can feel how sorry Peter is that he can't save May. It's a brutal moment that once again shows that this game is not afraid to go to dark places. It's ultimately a bittersweet ending, because the city is once again saved, but Peter just lost 3 of his most prominent role models in a single day. Martin Lee created the Feast Center as a way to help people, but turned into a terrorist to get revenge on one man. Otto Octavius broke away from a corporation to help people on his own, but turned to crime just to get back at that corporation. And Aunt May spent her last moments helping those who needed it in a time where everyone needed it, and ultimately sacrificed herself to save the city. They're all noble people who fell into the worst circumstances, and Peter was at the center of all of them. He tried to save them, but couldn't. It's a sad way to end the game, but it does end on an uplifting note. Life seems to go on. Peter and MJ seem to be on track to getting back together, and Miles has started developing his Spidey powers. So even if Peter isn't around, the world has a new Spider-Man coming along very soon. Yes, I'll get to playing Miles Morales after this video goes live and maybe make a video about it. Don't spam the comments with requests, please and thank you. On the whole, the story is fantastic. While the missions are a little underwhelming in Act 2 and kinda just feel like, oh, we're doing this now, okay, that's not really a fault of the game. They were just a little less engaging story-wise because it was more build-up than anything else. It built up the demons as a terrifying faction. It built up Otto's descent into madness. It built up the absolutely astounding Act 3 we had coming later. And if a little bit of build up for an amazing finale is what Act 2 needed to be, so be it. I will absolutely take that for the incredible moments we got in the endgame. Other than that, there's basically nothing to complain about because everything happens for a reason. Maybe if I started getting super analytical with it like I do with Batman, I can find something, but right now I've honestly got nothing. The story is just that solid. There's a lot to talk about with gameplay, so let's go ahead and break it down in a way that my Arkham brain can understand. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the movement in Spider-Man is probably the greatest traversal system in any modern game, barring Sunset Overdrive, of course. Web swinging throughout the streets of New York was probably one of the hardest things they had to nail down, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park. It's literally the first thing you do in the game and immediately makes you feel like Spider-Man. It's simple but incredibly effective. Just hold down the trigger and you'll start swinging. But where it gets interesting is in what you do during and after the swing. You can release the trigger at any time to start launching yourself, but more importantly, you can press X at any time to jump off the web and absolutely launch yourself. You can also press X while hanging in the air to do a web sling and pull yourself forward with great momentum. Or if you're up high, you can start a dive bomb to build up incredible speed that you then transfer into a web swing to launch yourself even more than normal. And of course, you can always do a web zip to instantly pull yourself onto a point, then launch yourself off with a powerful jump to gain even more momentum. It's an incredible system that just works so well and lets you absolutely fly across New York. The simple addition of the web sling makes this system so genius, because it allows you to quickly change direction on a whim or lets you maintain your current height for a little while longer. The only slight complaint I have with this system is the wall crawling. Not the crawling and running itself, those work perfectly. It's getting off that's my problem.
Phrasing?
For some reason, it always takes forever to get off a wall in this game. No matter how many buttons I press, it always takes way longer than it needs to, and is just really unintuitive. I think the idea is that you'll web pull onto the ground when you're done on the walls, but that doesn't really work when you accidentally stick yourself to a really tall building and need to turn around. It's the only part that's a little unintuitive that could honestly be fixed pretty easily. Jumping while on a wall should have you instantly jump off, simple as that. Maybe I'm just doing something wrong, but whatever. This is hardly a complaint against the whole system, as the problem only comes up very rarely. Although one complaint I do have that's at least kind of in this same category is that the world is pretty bland. Now, I'm not saying the world isn't detailed, it absolutely is. They made Manhattan feel like a bustling city in this game, and how much it changes throughout the story with new side quests and crime sprees is great. However, the city itself is just big city. I can pretty much never tell where I am in this world because it all just looks the same. Skyscraper after skyscraper, back alley after back alley, all look damn near exactly the same. And without the map, I'd have no idea if I was next to Oscorp or Avengers Tower. Maybe with a really long time of playing, I could start to develop an understanding of the city, but even after swinging around for a good 30 plus hours of playtime, I never knew what direction was what, or where I was meant to be going. I hate to do this, but I have to compare it to other games. Arkham City has a very distinct feel throughout the entire prison. You can pretty much always tell where you are with just a simple pan around because every area is incredibly distinct, even if I've only played through the game once. Same goes for Asylum and even to an extent Origins and Night, though definitely less so for the latter two. It could just be that they're smaller, but I think it's also the idea of having a lot of notable locations. Even though Spider-Man has a side mission designed around photographing landmarks throughout the city, it isn't exactly easy to find them without the map giving them away. They don't stand out at all, and the whole map just feels really bland. It's not dead, not by a long shot, there's a lot of life in the city, but it's definitely bland. And it all just comes down to being really big. The bigger you go, the less detail you're going to have, and the less memorable your map is going to be. Unless you spend years making every location in the map distinct, such that you could find it in a game of GeoGuessr, you're not going to be making a very memorable world. Hell, I didn't even know where the final battle took place when I was writing this script because the game never told me where anything was. In the end, it's not really a problem with the game since you're going to be swinging around it rather than snooping down in the streets, but it's something I thought I'd mention regardless. Combat is really something else in Spider-Man. It only makes sense to compare it to Arkham Combat, seeing as they're both melee-based superhero games, but they're both so different that you really can't. I'm gonna do it anyway down the line because that's how my mind works, but for now I'll try to judge it on its own merits. There are 4 basic moves to Spider-Man combat: attack, web sling, web shooter, and dodge. Dodging is self-explanatory. You press circle, Spider-Man performs a dodge, hopefully avoiding the incoming attack. Attacking back is also self-explanatory. You press square and Spider-Man will hit someone close enough to be attacked. Web slinging will have Spider-Man pull himself in close to an enemy no matter how far away they are. And finally, web shooters will do what you expect. Spider-Man will shoot a glob of web at the enemy, depending on which gadget you have selected. These 4 tools are the basic building blocks that the rest of the combat is built off of. And by God do they build off it. First is the basic attack, which when charged lets you uppercut an enemy straight into the air, giving you the option to start aerial combos. Aerial combos are the same as basic attacks, just, in the air, so enemies without weapons can't attack you on the ground. From here, you can use the web sling to quickly jump over to another enemy and start the process all over again, or hold the button to pull another enemy up to you, meaning you don't even have to touch the ground. Or you can literally web swing from this point to kick enemies in the face, or even slam whatever enemy you pulled up back into the ground. While you're doing all this, you can use R1 and L1 to grab random items from the street and throw them right in people's faces. If you web enemies up with your shooters, you can swing them around like those items and fling them into enemies, or even web them onto walls. You can also pull enemies' weapons right out of their hands and swing them around as items. If you dodge onto a wall, you have a leaping attack, which will catch most enemies off guard. You can also slide under enemies by dodging into them after attacking for a backstrike attack, which will leave them floored and do double damage. There's so many fun options you can seamlessly string together into a super fun and unique combat experience. Plus, unlike the Arkham saga, dropping a hit does not drop your combo, so you can occasionally take your time to think about what attack you're going to do next and not have to worry about losing all your hard work. On top of all that, you have the unique enemies the game throws at you. Weapon wielders are much more threatening here than in the Arkham games because they actually make one of your moves nearly useless. If you web swing into a weapon wielder, they'll still take damage, but then spin around and counter with a hit of their own, ruining your combo unless you can dodge away. They also block your basic attacks, forcing you to use gadgets or an uppercut to actually deal damage. Shield enemies will block all of your attacks, forcing you to dodge under them and retaliate from behind in order to drop them. And of course, there are armed enemies with really powerful guns at their disposal. Not only will regular guns shred through your health, but some of them will even have rocket launchers that lock onto you. But if you can dodge them at the right place and time, you can literally grab the rocket out of the air with your web and throw it right back into their faces. Brutes are really bulky and can't be attacked normally, while also going on rampages and attacking multiple times in a row to catch you off guard. They need to be webbed up in order for you to damage them, or force you to throw items in their face. Either way, they're very difficult to deal with. And way later in the story, you'll have to deal with some jetpack enemies, which are not only incredibly bulky, but also incredibly difficult to deal with. Having to fight an airborne enemy is surprisingly difficult despite the aerial nature of this combat system. And of course, they deal tons of damage, making them one of the biggest threats in the game. And of course, there's tons more I'm omitting for the sake of time, but believe me when I say that there's a lot of enemy variety across the game. One of my only complaints with this combat system is the gadgets. I'm not saying they're bad in any way, they're some of the most fun aspects of combat. The problem is that they're so inconvenient to use. All the gadgets are tied to the R1 button, which wouldn't be so bad on its own if you didn't have to bring up a weapon wheel in the middle of combat to be able to use them. It completely breaks the flow of combat when you want to use multiple gadgets in a single encounter, which you're sometimes required to do in certain challenges. It generally makes me forget about ever using them, and in that regard, you can't help but look at how the Arkham series handled gadgets. Each quickfire gadget is tied to its own button prompt. Left trigger for batarangs, left trigger and Y for back claw, double right trigger for freeze blast, etc. It works because you don't have to take time to switch to the appropriate gadget. You just press the input and it comes out. If they did this for Spider-Man, I think combat could have been exponentially better. Now you might be saying there are too many gadgets to tie to specific inputs. And in that regard, you're right. So here's what I propose. A menu that lets you decide what gadgets are tied to certain quick inputs. To keep it simple, inputs would be R1, R1 square, R1 triangle, and R1 circle. In the menu, you can assign 2 gadgets to each input, with the basic web shot always being tied to R1. Now, why 2 gadgets? Because in the middle of combat, you can tap L1 to swap between your 2 layouts and have quick access to all your gadgets. So you could have web shooters, impact web, spider-bot, and web bomb on one set, then the electric web, concussion blast, gravity vortex, and web mine on another. That way you can have access to everything at just the press of a button and can quickly use multiple gadgets in sequence like Spider-Man would. No doubt this would take some getting used to, and probably result in a few uses of gadgets you didn't want to. But I honestly think this would help the gadgets stick, get it, a lot more. They're so much fun to use, so I really wish I got to use them a lot more. Aside from that small complaint, combat is absolutely phenomenal. I obviously want to compare it to Arkham, but it's honestly its own beast. It's so incredibly unique with how much variety you can throw in on just a single button. You can throw people into the air, jump up and attack them, slam them down into the ground, swing into their faces, and so much more with literally one button. It's so much fun and is definitely one of the best aspects of this game. This is the one and only aspect of the game that I feel is severely lacking. Because compared to literally everything else in the game, stealth gameplay is just so boring. Let's be honest, it's a common problem in just about every game ever made. If it isn't built around being a stealth game, stealth play is probably going to be pretty bad. And Spider-Man is absolutely not a stealth game. You've got a few basic takedowns and some environmental hazards to distract people, and that's about it. And when you compare it to the treasure trove of abilities Batman has, Spider-Man may as well have nothing. Consider the fact that your scan literally tells you if an enemy is safe to be taken down, when in literally every other stealth game, it would be up to you choosing to take a risk to take out an enemy. Spider-Man completely removes that risk factor and gives you one of the most overpowered moves in stealth history on top of it. The web sling takedown is so busted, I have no idea how it made it through testing. It's an instant takedown on any unaware enemy that you can use from a distance that doesn't even draw attention to yourself despite the obvious noise it would create. The only downside is that it puts you on the ground, but considering how quickly you can zip back up to a vantage point, that downside is literally meaningless. And I mean, that's not to say the other move is exactly worse. The basic stealth takedown does exactly the same thing, just without you dropping down and being a lot slower. And that's literally all you have. Plus like 2 web gadgets and a few environment hazards. There's just so little to stealth play that it's literally my only major gripe with this game. Thankfully, it's barely seen at all throughout the main story, and the few times it is, it's not even required. Getting seen is not a game over in these stealth sections, as you can just drop the shadow act altogether and just rely on your fists to take everyone out. The section will no doubt be harder, but definitely more fun than doing the exact same move for 5 minutes with literally no risk to yourself whatsoever. And it's really a shame that these sections are so lame when everything else clearly had so much effort put in. And I have a feeling all the effort for stealth actually went into these 2. Occasionally throughout the game, the story will slow down and let us take control of Mary Jane or Miles Morales. They both take up little stealth missions that are pretty fun. As stealth would entail, you can't get caught or else it's a game over, and they both have unique tools to get around these situations. MJ has lures that will distract enemies in her way, and down the line gets a taser that will incapacitate really annoying enemies. Meanwhile, Miles has a hacking app that he can use to disrupt electronics to distract enemies in his way. They both have to carefully sneak through heavily armed goons, avoiding making any noise such as stepping on glass or knocking over boxes. While they aren't super heavy on gameplay as they tend to be pretty linear, they all have excellent atmosphere. The final section with Miles in particular was one of my favorite non-Spider-Man gameplay moments, because it was genuinely terrifying having to avoid Rhino as he just bursts his way through walls and menacingly stomps right above your head. It felt a lot like Killer Croc. It was great. And the Grand Central section with MJ was pretty great too, as you have to call Spider-Man for takedowns while carefully making your way through the station to eventually defuse a bomb. And the final section in Osborn's apartment is phenomenal, as it's a great detective section where you have to investigate this massive penthouse for clues and eventually avoid a ton of armed goons as you make your escape. They're overall great additions to gameplay and story, and are definitely more interesting than Spider-Man stealth, which I really appreciate. I can only hope we'll be getting more in Spider-Man 2. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting too much from bosses in this game. And through most of the story, I was kinda right. Bosses generally acted as beefed up versions of normal enemies for a good 60% of the story. Kingpin is a decent enough tutorial boss that teaches the combat mechanics pretty well. There's nothing too special, and he's basically just a brute enemy that you fight a mere 2 missions later, but it works as a test for your skills up until this point. Shocker is also alright. He's pretty basic with easily telegraphed attacks, good enough for showing off what a superpowered enemy can do, but was also what set my low expectations. Mr. Negative is also nothing special in his first bout, as it's just quickly reacting to his easily telegraphed attacks, then wailing on him for a few seconds. It plays a lot more like a QuickTime event than a boss, which was pretty disappointing the first time through. These fights didn't set the best precedent, and I wasn't too excited for the later fights, thinking they'd be all bark, no bite. That is until you reach the big turning point of the story and meet the Sinister Six. And holy crap, their bosses are fantastic. Because they aren't just individual members going at you for a bit. Instead, some of them actually team up, creating incredibly fun dynamics and making their fights all that much better. First up are Vulture and Electro, an incredibly fun fight because you have to stay airborne for the whole thing, constantly dodging Vulture's charge attacks and Electro's lightning blasts, only occasionally being able to go in for the hit. It really tests your web swinging abilities and reaction times, as both of them have really quick attacks. And of course tests your ability to multitask, as taking time to hit one leaves you open to the other's attacks. Keeping in line with airborne fights, we get a Scarecrow-like battle against Scorpion, where you have to keep above a sea of poison while avoiding giant scorpion tails. You also get some nightmare segments where you have to fight some scorpions, creating a very difficult fight as you have to fight up to 6 at once. And might I go ahead and mention that this is the second Insomniac game in a row where a character played by Yuri Lowenthal must traverse a dangerous drug trip where he imagines the floor is some kind of harmful substance, is chased by hallucinations of an enemy he previously fought, and ends with him in his underwear not really knowing how he got there. Is this a common thing in Insomniac games, or is it just a huge coincidence that it's the 2 I've currently played for this channel? Next are Rhino and Scorpion, another team up I wasn't expecting, but one that provides a great challenge. You have to constantly dodge Rhino's charges and lure him into specific points to be able to damage him, all while Scorpion constantly bombards you with his poison attacks from the background. It's a great way to do a charging enemy battle that really puts your reaction skills to the test. Just like Vulture and Electro, it's difficult because you have to focus on 2 dangerous enemies at once. Focusing on Scorpion will leave you open to Rhino's powerful charges that'll shred your health instantly, but focusing on timing a hit on Rhino will leave you open to Scorpion's poison barrages that'll whittle you down over time. So it's a difficult balancing act trying to take them both down without too heavily focusing on one or the other. These double battles both create really fun and chaotic scenarios that really emphasize the fact that you're outnumbered. Good luck! Plus, they both have really entertaining villains behind them, so there's a lot of fun banter all throughout. Mr. Negative is the next member, who's a great one-on-one battle that has a lot more difficulty and spectacle than his first bout. It's a great battle against Lee that really tests your reaction times and even throws in some horde battles to keep you always on your toes. It's actually a lot like Ra's al Ghul from Arkham City now that I think about it, with hordes of easily disposable enemies but one that just doesn't want to go down, who's in a giant demonic form to hide to hurt you from afar. And last but certainly not least, you have Dr. Otto Octavius, who isn't quite as good as the double battles, but more than makes up for it with the emotional beats it gives. It's a really fun fight where you pretty much just have to constantly wail on Otto while avoiding his really fast attacks. Eventually he'll electrify the floor and start throwing stuff at you, forcing you to keep above the ground and throw stuff back to stop him from attacking. All throughout this process, Peter is just begging Otto to stop his rampage, saying he was the best and he could have helped people. Top that off with everything I mentioned above in the story section, and you've got a fantastic final boss for this game. But really, bosses on the whole are really above average. There's a lot of really whatever fights in the early parts, but so many fantastic fights in the endgame. So, overall, I'll still call it a rousing success. There's a ton of other things I couldn't fit into the other categories that I just have to spend time praising here. It should surprise nobody that J. Jonah Jameson is just amazing throughout the whole game. Just hearing him randomly pop up as you're swinging through the city is just perfect.
Be vigilant. Be on guard. Keep a close eye on that barista with the man bun making your skinny latte, or you could be next!
Darren DePaul obviously isn't quite on the same level as the legendary J.K. Simmons, but he gives a wonderful performance nonetheless.
You serious?
Portraying this incredibly unhinged doofus who is simultaneously right and wrong in so many aspects.
Only a fool would believe that he's Mr. Positive one moment, helping the poor with a smile, then suddenly he's Mr. Negative, blowing up. Wait a minute! Mr. Negative! That's gold, Jared! Gold! Trademark it! Stat!
I couldn't have asked for a better addition to the world. There's a lot of side content in this game that really makes the world feel alive. Each district in New York is pretty much in chaos until Spider-Man jumps in to bring everything under control. There's random crimes that'll pop up across the city that you can stop, as well as a ton of other mini-missions, such as bringing down the bases of demons, fist goons, or escaped prisoners, solving the Black Cat case, or taking on the Taskmaster. Plus, just so many more. All are really nice distractions from the main story that make you feel like your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Plus, the game actually takes time away from the main story to force you into completing some of these missions, not only forcing you to start doing some side content, but also getting you engaged and possibly wanting to complete more anytime you're out of a mission. Suits! They certainly do exist. That's really all I have to say about them. Like I constantly say, I don't care about cosmetics, even when they do technically impact the game. So do with them whatever you like. It is literally the least of my concerns for this video, but if I didn't mention them, you'd all yell at me, so here you go. The small moments of Peter gameplay we get with Octavius are pretty fun. They give a nice moment of brevity from the bonkers story and let you just feel like a guy for a moment. And the minigames you can play are also really fun. I love a good deductive logic puzzle, and both the circuit and chemistry puzzles provide them in spades. I honestly just wish there were more of them. And of course, how could I finish this review without giving praise to the myth and legend himself, Stan the Man Lee, making one of his final cameos in this game. It's incredibly wholesome and just makes me smile, and I'm sure it made a big grin appear on all of your faces as well. Rest in peace, Stan. You are still missed very much.
Love seeing you two together again. You always were my favorites.
So now, the big question. Will I do any future videos on Spider-Man? Probably not. I've seen a lot of people suggesting challenges to me over the years, but there's literally no reason for me to do them because others have already done them. Spider-Man without web swinging, Spider-Man with only gadgets, Spider-Man without taking damage, Spider-Man without webs. People have torn this game to smithereens with challenges, some of them honestly kinda redundant. And I don't see any challenge that hasn't been done that I could feasibly do. I'm not going to do a challenge that someone else has already done. I think that's stupid and a waste of time and effort to do something that's already been made. Take notes, Hollywood. Plus, I don't just do these runs to challenge myself. I do them to see how much you can break a game away from the intended path. I beat Arkham City without grappling to see how much this useful mechanic is really needed in the game, not just to make Predator sections harder. I beat Asylum without gliding to see if the famous anti-piracy measure actually worked, not to make movement more restrictive in a game with already restrictive movement. I beat Watch Dogs without shooting because it's a seemingly integral mechanic that you can use to get out of every situation, not just to make shootouts harder. I beat Sunset Overdrive with only one weapon because you're given this enormous loadout that you may or may not need, when the first weapon you get is pretty much an all-rounder for killing things. The only challenge I've done specifically for the point of challenge has been Arkham without detective mode, and I didn't even really want to do that challenge because it affects so little gameplay. But you all wanted to see it, so I obliged. People have ripped apart every teeny tiny piece of Spider-Man, and I see absolutely nothing I can do to contribute to that. So, no, there will be no Spider-Man challenges unless y'all can find one that absolutely nobody else has done and actually pushes the game to its limits. And no, I'm not going to do a combo challenge, don't ask. In regards to other videos like One Amazing Scene, I don't know, maybe? I may have to give it another playthrough to determine if it's worthy of one, or if I can find one to begin with that hasn't already been examined. There's obviously a huge market for this game, probably even bigger than the Arkham games, but I just have nothing to contribute to the conversation because said conversation ended like 2 years ago. Insomniacs Spider-Man is one of the greatest superhero games of all time. Is it better than the Arkham saga? I don't know. I obviously have my biases and nostalgia that'll make me love one series more, so I honestly can't look at this comparison objectively. I've spent so many hours painstakingly analyzing every small detail in Arkham that it occupies more of my mind than I'd like to admit. And Spider-Man is just brand new to me. It's such a different experience that I can't compare them without my bias kicking in. I can't say which I prefer because I love both. I'm not going to make comparisons where I don't need to because I know my biases will kick in and choose an obvious side. I will almost certainly pick Batman in some places Spider-Man is objectively better because that's just how my brain works. I already tied Arkham into this script enough, I don't need a full video on it. Either way, I anxiously await to see what Miles has in store for me, as well as the upcoming Spider-Man 2. I know Insomniac won't let me down. Either way, just play this game. It is just about as near to perfection as you can get with a superhero game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later, chaps.
Each of you has a job to do. Your debts will be repaid when we're done.
Go!